The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty general store, and Katherine gripped the worn leather satchel containing everything she owned as she peered through the window at Veta, Colorado, wondering if the man waiting for her would recognize the sins painted across her face before she even stepped down. The July heat of 1881 pressed down on the small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Spanish peaks, and Sarah could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath the modest blue dress she had purchased specifically for this journey. It was nothing like the scarlet satin and black lace she had worn for 3 years at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Denver, but those clothes had been left behind along with the life she was desperate to escape. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the simple bonnet covering her dark auburn hair. Through the dusty window, she could see a tall man standing near a hitching post, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the wooden planks of the walkway. That had to be William Porter, the rancher who had answered her carefully worded advertisement seeking a husband and a fresh start. The driver opened the door and offered his weathered hand. Sarah took it, stepping down into the Colorado sunshine with her heart hammering against her ribs. The moment her boots touched the ground, the tall man straightened and walked toward her with a measured gait that spoke of confidence without arrogance. "Miss Katherine." His voice was deeper than she had imagined, rough around the edges but not unkind. "Yes, Mr. Porter." Sarah kept her eyes lowered, the habit of submission ingrained from years of reading men's intentions in their expressions. "William, just William." He reached for her satchel, and she noticed his hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked his land himself rather than sitting behind a desk counting money. "The ranch is about 5 miles west of town. I have the wagon ready. Are you hungry? We could stop at the hotel restaurant before we head out." "No, thank you. I would prefer to see my new home." Sarah finally raised her eyes to meet his, and what she saw there surprised her. William Porter had kind eyes, the color of aged whiskey, and they held no judgment, no cruel appraisal of her worth based on her appearance. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and dark blonde hair that fell just past his collar. A scar ran along his jawline, white against his tanned face. "As you wish." He gestured toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 bay horses. "I should warn you, the ranch is not fancy. It is just me and my foreman, Joe Martinez. We run about 200 head of cattle and some horses. The house needs a woman's touch, and I will be honest, I am not much of a cook." Sarah allowed herself a small smile as William helped her onto the wagon seat. "I can cook. My mother taught me before she passed." That much was true. Her mother had taught her many things before consumption had taken her when Sarah was 16, leaving her and her younger brother Thomas alone in a city that devoured the vulnerable. Everything that came after, all the choices that led her to the Silver Dollar Saloon, had been about survival. The wagon rolled through Veta's main street, past the mercantile, the bank, a church with a white steeple, and 2 saloons that made Sarah's stomach clench with familiar dread. She kept her face turned away, praying that no one from her past had drifted this far south. "The town is growing," William said, guiding the horses onto the western trail. "When I settled here 6 years ago, there were maybe 50 people. Now we have got close to 300, with more coming every month. The railroad is talking about extending a line through here, which would be good for business." "How did you come to Colorado?" Sarah asked, grateful for the distraction of conversation. "My family had a farm in Missouri, but after the war, things were difficult. My father died at Shiloh and my mother passed 2 years later. I sold the farm and headed west, looking for a new start." William glanced at her, and Sarah felt the weight of understanding in that look. They were both running from something, both seeking redemption in the unforgiving landscape of the West. The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, and Sarah felt her breath catch. A simple wooden house sat in a valley between two hills, with a barn, several corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse nearby. The Spanish peaks rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided the only shade for miles. "It is not much," William said, and Sarah heard the uncertainty in his voice. "It is beautiful," she replied, and meant it. After years of cramped rooms above a saloon, where the air always smelled of whiskey and smoke, and too many bodies pressed too close together, the wide open space felt like breathing for the first time. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on his pants. He was shorter than William, with black hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his entire life outdoors. "Joe, this is Sarah Katherine, my intended. Sarah, this is Joe Martinez. He has been with me since I bought this place." Joe removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Welcome, Miss Katherine. It will be good to have a woman around here. Maybe we will finally get some decent meals." His eyes twinkled with gentle humor, and Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. William helped her down from the wagon and carried her satchel toward the house. The front door opened into a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was remarkably clean for a bachelor household, though dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "Your room is through here," William said, leading her to a door off the main room. Inside was a modest bedroom with an iron-framed bed covered in a simple quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. "I will sleep in the loft for now. After we are married, well, we can discuss arrangements then." Sarah set her satchel on the bed and turned to face him. "William, there is something I must tell you before we go any further." His expression grew cautious, but he did not step away. "Go ahead." "In my letters, I told you I worked as a seamstress in Denver. That was not entirely true." Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes, even as shame burned in her chest. "I worked in a saloon. I was not a prostitute, but I served drinks and entertained the customers. I danced and sang and made men feel like they were special enough to spend their money. I am not proud of it, but after my mother died, my brother was only 12 and we had no other family. I did what I had to do to keep us fed and housed." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Sarah waited for William's expression to harden with disgust, for him to order her back to town and out of his life. Instead, he walked to the window and stood there for a long moment, looking out at his land. "Where is your brother now?" he finally asked. "Thomas is apprenticed to a printer in Denver. He is 17 now, learning an honest trade. Once I saved enough money, I found him that position. He does not know exactly how I earned that money, and I pray he never will." William turned back to her, and his eyes were thoughtful rather than condemning. "Did any man hurt you while you were there?" The question surprised her. "Some tried. The owner kept things relatively controlled, but yes, there were difficult nights." "And you chose to leave that life to come here and marry a stranger rather than continue on that path?" "Yes. I want a different life, William. I want to wake up without shame. I want to build something good and clean, but I understand if my past makes me unsuitable. I will return to Denver if you wish, though I would be grateful if you did not speak of this to anyone." William crossed the small room and took her hands in his. His palms were rough and warm, solid in a way that made her feel anchored. "Sarah, listen to me. Your past stays in the past. I do not care what you did to survive or what you had to endure. What matters to me is the woman standing here now. the woman brave enough to tell me the truth when you could have kept silent. If you are willing to build a life here with me, then that is what we will do." Tears blurred Sarah's vision, and she blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough tears over the years, had learned to hide her emotions behind painted smiles and practiced laughter. But William's acceptance, freely given without demands or conditions, cracked something open inside her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "We will take things slow," William said, releasing her hands and stepping back to give her space. "Get to know each other proper before we speak our vows. I want you to be certain this is what you want. The ranch is isolated, the work is hard, and I cannot promise you an easy life. But I can promise you respect and honesty, and I will never raise my hand to you in anger." "That is more than I ever hoped for," Sarah admitted. Over the following days, Sarah began to settle into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to cook breakfast for William and Joe, learning their preferences and trying to stretch the limited supplies in the pantry. The kitchen was better stocked than she expected, with flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, and precious luxuries like sugar and cinnamon that William had purchased in anticipation of her arrival. She threw herself into making the house a home, scrubbing floors and windows, mending curtains, and organizing the chaos of bachelor living. William had been right that the place needed a woman's touch, but he had maintained it well enough that the work was satisfying rather than overwhelming. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away, William would sit by the fireplace and talk with her. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to improve his herd with better breeding stock, about possibly expanding into horse breeding. He spoke of his childhood in Missouri, of a mother who had taught him to read from the family Bible, of a father he barely remembered who had marched away to war when William was only 10. Sarah found herself sharing stories too, carefully edited versions of her life that focused on her mother's kindness and Thomas's quick mind rather than the darker years. William never pressed for details, never pushed her to reveal more than she was comfortable sharing. On the fourth morning, Sarah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard horses approaching. She shaded her eyes against the sun and saw 3 riders coming up the trail, their horses moving at an easy pace. William emerged from the barn and walked to meet them, and Sarah noticed the subtle way he positioned himself between the riders and the house. The lead rider was a woman of perhaps 45, sitting tall in her saddle with the confidence of someone born to it. She wore a practical split skirt and a man's shirt, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Behind her were 2 men, both young and sharing her sharp features. "William Porter," the woman called out. "I heard you went and got yourself a mail-order bride. Thought I would come by and welcome her to the territory. Margaret." William's tone was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "Sarah, this is Margaret Hutchinson. She runs the neighboring ranch to the north. These are her sons, Robert and James." Sarah wiped her damp hands on her apron and walked forward, aware of Margaret's measuring gaze taking in every detail of her appearance. The woman's eyes were cold and calculating, and Sarah recognized the look. It was the same expression wealthy women in Denver had worn when they passed the saloon, their skirts pulled aside as if sin itself might contaminate them. "Miss Katherine," Margaret said, not bothering to dismount. "I am sure William has told you all about our little community here. We are quite particular about the kind of people we welcome." "Margaret," William's voice carried a warning note. "I am just being friendly, William. After all, we would not want any unsavory types bringing shame to Veta. We have worked hard to make this a respectable town." Margaret's smile did not reach her eyes. "Where did you say you were from, Miss Katherine?" "Denver," Sarah replied, lifting her chin. She had endured worse than veiled insults from bitter women. "Denver. Such a big city, and what was your occupation there? I worked in a dress shop, Sarah said, the lie coming easily after so much practice. Sewing and alterations. How convenient. We could certainly use a skilled seamstress in Veta. Perhaps you will be taking on clients. Perhaps once I am settled. Margaret's eyes narrowed, as if she sensed the evasion but could not quite pin it down. Well, I am sure we will be seeing more of each other. The ladies of Veta are quite close, you understand. We look out for one another, make sure everyone maintains proper standards. She gathered her reins. Come along, boys. I am sure William and his bride have much to discuss. The three riders turned and headed back down the trail, and Sarah released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Do not let Margaret bother you, William said once they were out of earshot. She thinks owning the biggest ranch in the area makes her queen of the territory. She has been trying to buy my land for 3 years, but I am not interested in selling. She does not like me. She does not like anyone she cannot control. You did well, standing up to her. That evening, as Sarah was preparing supper, she heard a commotion from the barn. She wiped her hands and stepped outside to see William and Joe attempting to calm a horse that was clearly in distress. The animal, a beautiful chestnut mare, was wild-eyed and thrashing in her stall. What happened? Sarah called. She is trying to foal, but something is wrong, Joe shouted back. The foal is not positioned right. Sarah had seen difficult births before, during her childhood on the small farm her parents had rented outside of St. Louis. Without thinking, she hurried into the barn. Let me look. William turned, surprised, but stepped aside. Sarah approached the mare slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. The horse's sides were heaving, slick with sweat and fear. Sarah ran her hands along the mare's flank, feeling for the foal's position. The front legs are folded back, she said. I need to turn the foal before it gets stuck. That is dangerous, William protested. The mare could kick you. She will die if we do not help her, and the foal too. Hold her head, talk to her. Keep her as calm as you can. Sarah rolled up her sleeves and carefully reached inside the mare, feeling for the foal's legs. The mare stamped and whinnied, but William and Joe held her steady, their voices a constant murmur of reassurance. Sarah's arms ached and sweat poured down her face, but she managed to manipulate one tiny hoof forward, then the other. There, she gasped, pulling her arms back. The foal should come now. They waited, tense and silent, as the mare's contractions intensified. Then, in a rush of fluid, a tiny colt slid onto the straw. The mare immediately turned to her baby, nickering softly and beginning to clean the membrane from its face. Sarah sagged against the stall wall, exhausted but elated. William was staring at her with something like wonder in his eyes. Where did you learn to do that? My father had horses before he lost everything to gambling debts. I was 8 when I helped with my first foaling. She smiled, watching the colt struggle to its feet on impossibly long legs. I had forgotten how miraculous it is. William reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender. You are full of surprises, Sarah Katherine. That night, for the first time since her arrival, Sarah felt something other than anxiety about her new life. She felt useful. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could build something real here. The weeks passed, and Sarah found herself falling into an easy partnership with William. They worked together in the garden she had started behind the house, planting vegetables to supplement their diet. She helped him mend fences, learning to hammer posts into the hard ground and string wire tight enough to hold. Her hands blistered and then calloused, and her skin darkened under the relentless sun. In the evenings, William taught her to ride properly, not the ladylike side saddle she had learned as a girl, but the practical astride method necessary for ranch work. She discovered she loved the freedom of it, the wind in her face and the powerful animal responding to her commands. They talked endlessly, sharing dreams and fears, learning each other's rhythms. William had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh in a way she had not laughed in years. He was patient with her jumpy nervousness around sudden sounds, the legacy of too many drunken customers who had grabbed at her without warning. One evening, nearly 6 weeks after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the Spanish peaks in shades of gold and crimson. William reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Sarah, I think we have waited long enough. I would like to marry you if you are still willing." Sarah's heart raced, but it was anticipation rather than fear. "Yes, I am willing." "There is something I should tell you first, though, about why I wanted a wife." Sarah turned to look at him, noting the tension in his jaw. "My mother, before she died, she made me promise that I would not end up alone like my father. He was a hard man, made harder by loss and war. She wanted me to find someone to share my life with, to build a family. I thought about courting one of the local girls, but the truth is, most of them want a man who will move to town, who will give up ranching for shopkeeping or some other respectable trade. I love this land, Sarah. I do not want to leave it. When I put out that advertisement, I was hoping to find someone practical, someone who understood that life out here is not easy but can be good. Someone who would not judge me for my rough edges." "I do not have any room to judge anyone for their rough edges," Sarah said softly. "William, I need you to understand something. I may never be the wife you imagined. There are things from my past that still haunt me. Sometimes I will wake up from nightmares. Sometimes I will flinch when you move too quickly. I am working on it, but healing takes time." William lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then we will heal together. Your past stays in the past, remember? We only move forward from here." They were married the following Sunday in the small white church in Veta. Joe stood as William's witness, and the Reverend's wife, a kind woman named Judith, stood for Sarah. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when William slipped the thin gold band onto her finger and kissed her for the first time, Sarah felt something shift deep inside her chest. This was real. This was her life now. Margaret Hutchinson attended with her sons, sitting in the back pew with her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. A few other ranching families filled the remaining seats, curious to meet William's bride. Sarah held her head high and spoke her vows clearly, refusing to show the fear that gnawed at her stomach. Someone might recognize her. Someone might know what she was, but no one stood to object. No one pointed an accusing finger. She walked out of that church as Sarah Porter, wife of William Porter, and the July sunshine felt like a benediction. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with Joe cooking steaks over an open fire and Judith bringing a chocolate cake that she insisted was a Porter family recipe, though William confessed later he had never heard of it. They ate and drank coffee, and as the sun set, Joe and Judith took their leave, giving the newlyweds privacy. Sarah stood in the bedroom that was now truly hers to share, her hands shaking as she unbuttoned her good dress. The door opened quietly, and William entered. He had removed his jacket and tie, and his shirt was partially unbuttoned, revealing the tanned skin of his throat. "Sarah, we do not have to do anything tonight if you are not ready." She turned to face him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and patience. "I want to. I am just nervous. My experience with men has not been entirely pleasant." William crossed to her and cupped her face in his hands. "Then we will take it slow. You tell me if you want me to stop, and I will. No questions, no anger. This is your choice always." What followed was tender and careful. Nothing like the rough groping she had endured in dark corners when customers got too bold and the owner looked the other way. William touched her like she was precious, like she mattered beyond her body's utility. When he made love to her, he watched her face, learning what brought her pleasure rather than simply taking his own. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the quilts with the night breeze cooling their heated skin, Sarah felt tears sliding down her temples. "Did I hurt you?" William asked immediately, his voice full of concern. "No, you did not hurt me. That is why I am crying, because for the first time it did not hurt. For the first time I felt cherished instead of used." William pulled her close, tucking her head beneath his chin. "You are cherished, Sarah. You are my wife, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in coming here." The months that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. Summer faded into autumn, and the Spanish peaks were dusted with snow that crept lower each week. She and William worked side by side, preparing the ranch for winter, bringing the cattle down from the high pastures and stockpiling hay in the barn. Sarah discovered she had a talent for working with horses. The chestnut mare whose foal she had saved followed her around like a devoted dog, and William gave her the mare as a gift. Sarah named her Russet and spent hours training her, developing a bond that surprised even Joe, who had been working with horses his entire life. In October, Sarah traveled to Veta with William for supplies and discovered that her skills as a seamstress were in genuine demand. The Reverend's wife asked if she could alter a dress, and the work was so well done that 2 other women commissioned new dresses. Sarah found herself with a small but steady income of her own, money that she carefully saved in a tin box under the floorboards. She sent a letter to Thomas, giving him her married name and new address, telling him she had found happiness in Colorado. His response came 6 weeks later, full of excitement about his apprenticeship and relief that she was safe and settled. He did not ask questions about how she had afforded his apprenticeship fees, and Sarah was grateful for his discretion. Winter arrived in full force in late November, bringing blizzards that trapped them inside for days at a time. Sarah learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to make stew last for 3 meals, to patch clothes until they could not be patched anymore. The isolation did not bother her the way she thought it might. Instead, she relished the quiet, the peace of being snowbound with only William for company. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, William reading aloud from the Denver newspapers that arrived weeks late, or from the novels Sarah ordered from a catalog. She had confessed her love of reading, and William had surprised her by ordering an entire box of books for Christmas, everything from Shakespeare to dime novels about the West. On Christmas morning, Sarah gave William a shirt she had sewn herself, using fabric she had purchased with her sewing money. The fit was perfect, and the stitching was so fine it looked like store-bought. William gave her a matched pair of pistols in tooled leather holsters. "I know you do not like violence," he said, "but out here, a woman needs to know how to defend herself. Joe and I will teach you to shoot come spring." Sarah held the pistols, feeling their weight. Part of her wanted to refuse, to reject anything connected to the violence of the world she had left behind. But William was right. The West was not always kind to women, and being able to protect herself would give her a freedom she had never known. "Thank you," she said, and kissed him soundly. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Sarah felt William's hand rest gently on her stomach. "Are you hoping for a child?" she asked quietly. "Only if you are. I will not press you on that either, Sarah. Some women cannot bear children and some choose not to. Either way, you are enough for me." Sarah turned in his arms. "I think I would like children. Not right away, perhaps, but someday. I want to raise them differently than I was raised. I want them to grow up without fear, without hunger, without shame. Then that is what we will give them when the time comes. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts throughout March and April. By May, the high pastures were green again, and the cattle were driven back up into the hills. Sarah had indeed learned to shoot, practicing for hours until she could hit a target at 50 paces. William was an excellent teacher, patient and calm, never mocking her when she missed or flinched at the noise. Joe taught her to rope, and though she was never as skilled as the men, she could manage well enough to help with branding. The work was exhausting and often dirty, but Sarah threw herself into it with determination. She was building a life here, proving herself useful, earning her place. In late May, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was a rough-looking man with a scraggly beard and cold eyes that made Sarah's instincts scream danger. William was out checking fence lines, and Joe had ridden to town for supplies, leaving Sarah alone. The man dismounted and walked toward the house with the swagger of someone used to taking what he wanted. Sarah stepped onto the porch, her hand resting casually near the pistol she now wore whenever William was not nearby. "Help you with something," she called out. "Heard there was a pretty little thing living out here. Wanted to see for myself." The man's gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You are not from around here, are you? Got a look about you. Familiar, like maybe I have seen you before." Sarah's heart stopped. The man was studying her face, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "Wait, I know you. You are that girl from the Silver Dollar in Denver, Sarah something. Used to sing on Saturdays." His smile revealed yellowed teeth. "Does your husband know what you really are? My past is none of your concern." "You need to leave." Sarah's hand moved to grip the pistol. The man laughed. "Might be I will. Or might be I will stick around, have a conversation with Mr. Porter when he gets back. Bet he would be real interested to know he married a saloon girl. Unless, of course, you can convince me to keep quiet." Sarah drew the pistol in one smooth motion, the months of practice serving her well. She cocked the hammer, the sound loud in the quiet afternoon. "Or you could leave now and save yourself a bullet." The man's smile faded. "You would not shoot me. Try me." They stared at each other for a long moment. Sarah kept her hands steady, her expression blank, calling on every skill she had learned in the saloon where showing fear was an invitation to be hurt. Finally, the man backed up, his hands raised. "Ain't worth it," he muttered, climbing back onto his horse. "But this will get around, you know. Can't keep secrets forever." Sarah watched him ride away, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. As soon as he disappeared over the rise, she sagged against the porch post, the pistol nearly slipping from her shaking hands. William found her there an hour later, still standing on the porch staring at the horizon. "Sarah, what happened?" She told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. William listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each sentence. "Did he touch you?" William finally asked. "No, I drew on him before he could get close." "Good." William pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You did exactly right. I am proud of you for standing your ground." "But William," he recognized me. "He is going to talk. Everyone will know." "Then let them know." William's voice was firm. "You are my wife." Nothing that happened before we met changes that. If people have a problem with it, that is their problem, not ours. You do not understand. Margaret Hutchinson already dislikes me. If she finds out, she will make my life miserable. She will turn the whole town against me. William cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Sarah, listen to me. I do not care what Margaret or anyone else thinks. Your past stays in the past. If they cannot accept that, if they cannot see the good, hard-working woman you are now, then they are fools and we do not need their approval." But word did spread. just as Sarah had feared. Within a week, the whispers started. Women who had been friendly now avoided her in town. The Reverend's wife apologized but said she could not commission any more sewing because her husband thought it would be inappropriate. 2 women canceled dress orders, offering weak excuses that fooled no one. Margaret Hutchinson took particular pleasure in the scandal, making pointed comments whenever Sarah was within earshot. At church the following Sunday, Margaret stood and suggested that the congregation should be careful about who they allowed into their community, that certain types of women brought nothing but shame and should not be welcomed into respectable homes. Sarah sat frozen in the pew, feeling every eye on her. William's hand found hers and gripped tight. When Margaret finished her venomous speech, William stood. "Margaret, you are right that we should be careful about who we welcome into our community. We should be on guard against hypocrites who hide their own sins behind a veil of righteousness. We should reject those who find pleasure in cruelty and feed their pride by tearing others down. My wife has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire bitter body. She made hard choices to protect her family, and she has nothing to be ashamed of. If anyone here has a problem with Sarah, you can take it up with me directly." The silence that followed was absolute. The Reverend cleared his throat uncomfortably, clearly torn between keeping the peace and addressing the conflict. Before he could speak, an unexpected voice broke the tension. "William is right." Joe Martinez stood from his seat near the back. "I have known Sarah Porter for near a year now. She is the hardest working woman I have ever met. She saved my best mare and her foal. She helped me doctor cattle through the winter when we had that outbreak of fever. She never once complained about the hard work or the isolation. Any of you who judge her should take a good long look at yourselves first." "Hear, hear." To Sarah's shock, the blacksmith's wife stood as well. "I never did like gossip. Sarah has been nothing but kind to my children. That is all I need to know about her character." One by one, several other members of the congregation stood in silent support. Not everyone, and Margaret and her sons remained seated with expressions of disgust, but enough that Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. After the service, William led her outside quickly, not giving anyone a chance to approach with either sympathy or criticism. They rode home in silence, and Sarah could not stop crying, overwhelmed by the public exposure of her shame and equally overwhelmed by William's unwavering support. "I am sorry," she kept saying. "I am so sorry you had to defend me like that. I am not sorry. You are my wife, Sarah. That means I stand with you no matter what. I meant what I said in there. You have nothing to be ashamed of." But shame was a difficult thing to shed, and over the following weeks, Sarah struggled with depression that seemed to seep into her bones. She threw herself into work, exhausting herself with chores, as if she could somehow outrun the voices in her head that told her she was dirty, worthless, forever stained by her past. William tried to draw her out, but she pulled away from his attempts at intimacy. Not because she did not love him, but because she could not bear the thought of him touching someone so tainted. He deserved better than a broken saloon girl playing at being a rancher's wife. One evening in late June, nearly a year after she had first arrived in Veta, Sarah was sitting by the creek in the fading twilight when William found her. He sat down beside her without speaking, just his solid presence in the gathering darkness. "I thought I could outrun my past," Sarah finally said. "I thought if I came far enough, worked hard enough, became good enough, it would not matter anymore. But it does matter. It always will. It matters to some people, small-minded people who cannot see beyond their own narrow view of the world. But Sarah, it does not matter to me. It does not matter to Joe or the blacksmith's wife or the dozen other people who stood up for you." I saw how Margaret looked at me. like I was garbage, like I was contaminating the church just by being there. Margaret is a bitter woman who has spent her life trying to control everyone around her because she is terrified that without that control, people will see how empty she really is. You are not garbage, Sarah. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. You should not have married me. You could have found someone without a past, someone respectable. William turned to her, his expression fierce. I do not want someone respectable. I want you. I have wanted you since the first day you stepped off that stagecoach, trying so hard to be brave even though I could see you were terrified. I have wanted you every day since, watching you tackle every challenge this life throws at you without complaint. You think your past makes you less. It makes you more, Sarah. It makes you real in a way those so-called respectable women will never be. But I am broken, William. There are pieces of me that will never work right again. Then we will work around the broken pieces. God knows I have enough of my own. William took her hand. When I came back from the war, I could not sleep for months without nightmares. I could not stand loud noises. I drank too much and fought anyone who looked at me wrong. It was my mother who helped me see that surviving something terrible does not make you broken. It makes you a survivor. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the first crack in the wall she had built around herself. How do you keep going when it feels like the weight of everything will crush you? You take it one day at a time, and you let the people who love you help carry the weight. William kissed the top of her head. Sarah, I love you. Not in spite of your past, not ignoring your past, but including your past because it made you who you are. And who you are is pretty damn extraordinary. I love you too, Sarah whispered, and saying it out loud felt like breaking free from chains she had not realized she was wearing. They sat by the creek until full dark, and when they walked back to the house hand in hand, Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. The healing would not be instantaneous, and there would still be hard days, but she was not alone anymore. She had William, and she had the life they were building together. The summer of 1882 was punishingly hot and dry, testing the ranch's resources. The creek ran lower than William had ever seen it, and they had to move the cattle to higher pastures in search of water and grazing. Sarah learned to work alongside the men during the long, exhausting days, her hands blistered from ropes, and her face burned dark by the sun despite her bonnet. In August, a brush fire started somewhere to the south and raced across the dry grasslands. Sarah, William, and Joe worked frantically to dig fire breaks and wet down the buildings. For 3 terrifying days, the air was thick with smoke, and ash rained down like snow. They saved the house and barn but lost a section of fence and about 10 acres of grazing land. The night after the fire was finally contained, William and Sarah collapsed on their bed, too exhausted to even undress properly. I was afraid we would lose everything, Sarah admitted. Me too. But we did not. We are still here, still standing. William laced his fingers through hers. That is what matters. In September, Sarah realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month before saying anything, not wanting to get William's hopes up. But when October came and went with still no sign, she told him over breakfast. William's fork clattered to his plate. Are you certain? As certain as I can be. I have felt sick in the mornings and my clothes are getting tight around the waist. William stood so quickly his chair tipped over. He crossed to her and pulled her up into a hug, spinning her around. We are going to have a baby. Sarah, we are going to be parents. His joy was infectious, and Sarah found herself laughing despite her nervousness about the changes coming. They told Joe, who was so excited he rode to town and bought a bottle of whiskey to celebrate, though Sarah could only drink a tiny sip before the smell made her nauseous. The pregnancy was difficult. Sarah was sick constantly through the winter, barely able to keep food down. William hovered anxiously, trying to help but feeling helpless in the face of her misery. Joe took over most of the cooking, and between the two men, they managed to keep Sarah fed and the ranch running. By spring, the sickness had passed, and Sarah bloomed with health and energy. Her belly swelled and she felt the baby moving inside her, tiny flutters that gradually became stronger kicks. William would rest his hand on her stomach in the evenings, marveling at each movement. "What do you hope for?" Sarah asked one night. "A boy or a girl?" "Healthy," William said immediately. "That is all I care about. As long as you and the baby come through this safely, nothing else matters." Sarah went into labor on a hot June morning in 1883, nearly 2 years to the day after she had first arrived in Veta. William sent Joe racing to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Martha who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening, long hours of increasing pain that had Sarah gripping William's hand hard enough to leave bruises. "You are doing so well," William kept saying, his face pale with worry. "Just a little longer, sweetheart." Finally, as the sun was setting, Sarah gave one final pushing effort and the baby emerged in a rush. The midwife caught the infant expertly, clearing its nose and mouth. A strong, angry cry filled the room. "It is a boy," Martha announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Sarah sagged back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure as Martha cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft blankets. Then the midwife placed the infant in Sarah's arms, and Sarah looked down at her son's red, wrinkled face with a sense of wonder that eclipsed everything she had ever felt. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." William was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and child. "He is perfect. Sarah, you are amazing. You did so well." They named him Thomas William Porter after both their families and called him Tommy. He was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping little, but Sarah did not mind. She would sit in the rocking chair William had made for her, nursing Tommy and singing the lullabies her mother had once sung to her. The townspeople who had shunned Sarah after the scandal about her past began to soften. It was hard to maintain righteous anger in the face of a new mother's joy, and several women came by with gifts of baby clothes and offers of advice. Sarah accepted their overtures cautiously, not quite trusting but willing to try. Margaret Hutchinson, however, remained implacable in her hostility. She made it clear she considered Tommy tainted by his mother's past and refused to acknowledge Sarah when they crossed paths in town. Sarah had learned to ignore the older woman's barbs, but it still stung. When Tommy was 3 months old, tragedy struck the Hutchinson ranch. James, Margaret's younger son, was thrown from a horse and broke his back. The doctor said he would never walk again. Margaret, faced with the possibility of losing her ability to run the ranch as age and James's disability caught up with her, began pressuring Robert to marry and produce heirs. Robert, however, had no interest in marriage. He was a quiet man who preferred his own company, and the pressure from his mother made him retreat further into himself. The tension between them became the talk of Veta, and Sarah found herself feeling unexpected sympathy for the family, despite how Margaret had treated her. In December, Margaret Hutchinson appeared at the Porter Ranch. It was the first time she had set foot on the property since before Sarah's arrival, and her presence on the porch was so unexpected that Sarah almost did not answer the knock. "May I come in?" Margaret asked, her voice stiff and formal. Sarah stepped aside, settling Tommy more securely on her hip. Margaret entered slowly, her eyes taking in the cozy home Sarah had created, the baby's cradle by the fireplace, the curtains Sarah had sewn. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said abruptly. "I have treated you abominably, and it was wrong of me." Sarah was so surprised she could not immediately respond. Margaret sat down uninvited, her hands twisting in her lap. "When my James was hurt, I realized how quickly everything can change. How the things we think are important are really just pride and fear dressed up as righteousness." Margaret looked up, and her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I have been afraid for so long. Afraid of losing my ranch, afraid of being alone, afraid of not being respected. I took that fear out on you because you represented everything I was taught to despise. But you have been braver than I ever was, starting over despite everything. I am sorry, Sarah. I am truly sorry." Sarah sat down across from her, still wary. "Why now? Why tell me this now?" "Because James asked me to. He has been in so much pain, physical and otherwise, and he told me he does not want to spend what time he has left watching his mother destroy herself with bitterness. He said I should make amends while I still can." Margaret's voice broke. "The doctor says the infection in his back is getting worse. He may not make it through the winter." Sarah's heart clenched with sympathy. "I am so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" "No, but thank you for asking." Margaret stood to leave. "I just wanted you to know that I was wrong. You are a good woman, and William is lucky to have you." After Margaret left, Sarah stood at the window for a long time, Tommy sleeping against her shoulder. William came in from the barn and found her there. "Was that Margaret Hutchinson I saw leaving?" "Yes. She apologized for everything." "For everything." Sarah turned to him. "People can change, can they not? Even when you think they are too set in their ways, they can still choose to be better." "I suppose they can." William kissed her forehead. "Just like you chose to be better when you left Denver and came here. Just like I chose to be better when I stopped letting the war define me. We all get to choose, every day, who we want to be." James Hutchinson died in February of 1884, and Margaret sold half her ranch to a family from Texas, keeping only enough land that she and Robert could manage without hiring a large crew. She was a changed woman after her son's death, quieter and more humble. She would never be warm, but the active hostility was gone. Sarah found herself becoming friends with Robert Hutchinson, of all people. He came by the ranch occasionally to talk about horses, and Sarah discovered he shared her love of training. They would spend hours discussing techniques while Tommy played at their feet. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life. Tommy grew into a curious, energetic toddler, then a bright young boy who followed his father everywhere. Sarah taught him to read and write, using the books William had given her and ordering primers from the catalog. William taught him to ride and rope and care for the animals. In the spring of 1886, Sarah realized she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in January of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Lily Mee. Where Tommy had been a demanding baby, Lily was calm and content, sleeping through the night almost from the start. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch prospered, and William was able to buy more land and improve the house. Sarah's sewing business grew, and women came from as far as 20 miles away for her work. She saved the money carefully, adding to the nest egg she had started years ago. Tommy started school in Veta when he turned 6, riding to town with Joe 3 days a week. He was a good student, quick with numbers like his Uncle Thomas, and Sarah dreamed of maybe sending him to college someday, of giving him opportunities she had never had. In 1889, when Tommy was 6 and Lily was 2, a letter arrived from Denver. Sarah's hands shook as she opened it, fearing bad news about her brother. Instead, Thomas wrote to tell her he had finished his apprenticeship and was now a junior partner in the printing business. He was engaged to a schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and wanted Sarah and her family to come to Denver for the wedding. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had not been back to Denver since she left, and the thought of returning to the city where she had endured so much filled her with dread. But William encouraged her to go. "Thomas is your family," he said. "He deserves to have you there for his wedding, and you deserve to show him how far you have come, to let him see the life you have built." So, in June of 1889, the Porter family made the journey to Denver. Sarah's heart pounded as the train pulled into the station, but William held her hand tight, and Tommy's excited chatter about the city distracted her from her anxiety. Thomas met them at the station, and Sarah barely recognized him. The skinny 12-year-old boy she had said goodbye to 8 years ago was now a handsome young man of 20, confident and well-dressed. He swept her up in a hug that lifted her off her feet. "Sarah, you look wonderful, and this must be William." Thomas shook William's hand enthusiastically. "And these are my niece and nephew. Tommy, Lily, I am your Uncle Thomas." They spent 3 days in Denver, staying in a hotel and attending wedding events. Elizabeth was a lovely woman, kind and intelligent, clearly devoted to Thomas. Sarah found herself relaxing as the hours passed, realizing that this was not the same city she had fled. Or perhaps she was not the same woman who had fled it. On the second evening, Thomas asked to speak with Sarah privately. They walked through the hotel garden while William watched the children in the lobby. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I know what you did to pay for my apprenticeship." Sarah stopped walking, her heart sinking. "Thomas, please, I do not want to talk about it." "I need you to know that I am grateful, but I am also sorry. You should never have had to sacrifice yourself like that for me. You were 12 years old and alone. I was your big sister. I did what I had to do. And you have spent years carrying shame that should never have been yours to carry." Thomas took her hands. "I have done well, Sarah. I make a good salary now, and Elizabeth's father is giving us a house as a wedding gift. I want to pay you back for everything you spent on me." "Thomas, no. That money is long gone and I do not need it. But I do. I need to know that I have balanced the scales somehow. Please, Sarah, let me do this." Sarah saw the earnestness in his eyes and realized he needed this for his own peace of mind. "All right, but I am putting it away for Tommy and Lily's education, and you have to come visit us in Veta." "It is a deal." They returned home after the wedding, and Sarah felt like something inside her had finally healed. Thomas was safe and happy, thriving in a life she had made possible. Her sacrifices had meaning, had led to good things. The shame that had clung to her for so long finally began to loosen its grip. The 1890s brought more changes. Joe Martinez married a widow named Carmen who had 2 children from her previous marriage, and they moved into a house on the Porter property that William helped them build. Tommy started helping more seriously with ranch work, and Lily began school. In 1892, Sarah became pregnant again. She was 32 now, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. The baby, another boy they named Samuel, arrived 6 weeks early and struggled to breathe. For 3 terrifying days, Sarah and William took turns holding him, keeping him warm, trying to will him to live. Samuel survived, but he was always smaller and weaker than his siblings, prone to illness, and unable to keep up with the physical demands of ranch life. Sarah devoted herself to his care, reading to him for hours, teaching him about plants and birds, and everything she could observe from the safety of the porch. William never showed disappointment that his youngest son could not work the ranch. Instead, he encouraged Samuel's curiosity, bringing him books about science and nature, building him a telescope so he could study the stars. Tommy and Lily were fiercely protective of their little brother, including him in their games and adventures in ways that accommodated his limitations. The The turn of the century found the Porter family well established and respected in Veta. Sarah was 40 years old, a successful seamstress and ranch wife, mother to 3 children who were growing up strong and confident. The scandal of her past had faded into distant memory, mentioned only rarely by the very old-fashioned members of the community. Margaret Hutchinson died in 1901, and to everyone's surprise, she left a portion of her estate to Sarah with a note that read, "For the woman who showed me what true strength looks like." Sarah used the money to start a school fund, helping families who could not afford to send their children to school pay for books and supplies. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1901, William took Sarah back to the spot where he had proposed, overlooking the creek with the Spanish peaks in the distance. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Answering my advertisement, coming out here to the middle of nowhere," Sarah laughed. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life, William. A real life, not just existence. You gave me a home, a family, a place where I belong." "You gave me the same," William said softly. "I was so alone before you came, I did not even realize how alone until you filled up all the empty spaces." "Your past stays in the past," Sarah quoted, remembering the words that had changed her life. "You told me that the day I confessed the truth, and you have never wavered from it. Because your past made you who you are, and I love who you are." William pulled her close. "I will always love who you are." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives. Tommy grew up to run the ranch alongside his father, eventually marrying a girl from town and building his own house on Porter land. Lily became a teacher, the first woman from Veta to attend normal school in Denver, returning to educate the next generation. Samuel, defying everyone's expectations, became a botanist, studying the unique plants of the Rocky Mountains and publishing papers that made the Porter name known in scientific circles. Sarah and William grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down but their love never diminishing. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1931, surrounded by 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Sarah died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1935, at the age of 75. William followed her 6 months later, unable to bear the world without her in it. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside Veta, their graves overlooking the ranch they had built together. On Sarah's headstone, Tommy had inscribed, "Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She chose courage over fear and love over shame." On William's, "Beloved husband and father, he saw the truth in people's hearts and loved without condition." The ranch stayed in the Porter family for generations, passed down through Tommy's children and grandchildren. The story of how Sarah and William found each other, how they overcame prejudice and built a life together, became family legend, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But it was not a myth. It was real. It was 2 people choosing each other every day through every hardship and joy. It was William saying, "Your past stays in the past," and meaning it with every fiber of his being. It was Sarah having the courage to believe him, to believe she deserved happiness and love despite everything she had endured. It was proof that people can change, that redemption is possible, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. It was a testament to the truth that our past does not define us unless we let it, that we are always free to choose who we become. And in the end, that choice, that daily decision to be better and love deeper, was the greatest gift they gave to each other and to everyone who came after them. Their love story became part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of Veta and the shadow of the Spanish peaks, a reminder that even in the harsh, unforgiving West, grace and mercy could take root and flourish. The Porter Ranch still operates today, though the original house was replaced in the 1950s with a more modern structure. But the barn that William built with his own hands still stands, weathered but sturdy, and the creek still runs along the eastern edge of the property, lined with the descendants of the same cottonwood trees that provided shade for Sarah and William. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the wind comes down from the mountains, the current Porters swear they can hear laughter echoing across the valley, the sound of two people who found joy in each other and never let go, whose love proved stronger than shame, stronger than judgment, stronger than everything that tried to tear them apart. Their story reminds us that the past is not a prison unless we make it one, that forgiveness, especially of ourselves, is possible, that love offered freely and without conditions can transform lives. William Porter saw Sarah Katherine not for what she had done but for who she was and who she could become. And Sarah had the courage to accept that love, to believe she deserved it, to let it change her. That courage, that faith, that love, echoes through the generations, a legacy more valuable than land or money or status. It is the legacy of two people who chose each other against all odds and never regretted that choice for a single moment of their long, full lives together. The end came for their mortal bodies, but the love they built, the family they created, the grace they showed to each other and to others, those things endure. The Porter name is still spoken with respect in Veta, not because of wealth or power, but because of the example set by Sarah and William, the proof that anyone can rise above their circumstances, that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to seek it. Their love story is not a fairy tale. It is better than that. It is real, grounded in the hard work and daily choices that build a life. It is two imperfect people committing to each other and honoring that commitment through everything life threw at them. It is proof that love, real love, is not about finding a perfect person, but about seeing an imperfect person perfectly. And so the legacy continues, generation after generation, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren learning the story of Sarah and William, learning that your past does not have to define your future, that courage and love can overcome anything, that grace freely given has the power to change the world. In the end, that is what they gave to each other and to all who came after. Hope. Hope that tomorrow can be better than yesterday, that we can choose differently, that love is always worth the risk. And that hope, planted in the soil of Veta, Colorado in 1881, continues to bear fruit to this day, a testament to two remarkable people who loved each other well and taught generations the true meaning of grace.